You're listening to The Route, a sports talk podcast. On Facebook.com/TheRoute2 and on Twitter @the_Route2.
Welcome in to the Route Baseball Podcast Edition here, Part 2. If you caught the entire almost hour-long AL discussion, well, you're about to be in for a second treat because we have the National League podcast discussion for the Major League Baseball postseason. Ryan Swanigan with you. I am joined by KRNU sports announcer Matt Rigby, and from the Daily Nebraskan here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, I should say, as well as a KRNU announcer himself and contributor, Michael Dixon. Gentlemen, we just talked for almost an hour about the AL and the craziness that is with that division, or that side of the postseason, I should say. And now we move to the National League. Not as complex. Everything is always more simplified in the National League, and it usually ends up being that, I guess, maybe a lot more interesting baseball, per se, is played in the National League side, although there might be the Toronto Blue Jays might have something to say about that. But we get to the National League side, and Matt, I want to start with you first, because you mentioned this earlier with, I think the Rangers, and how they were not that good in the first half of the year, and how it was almost at a point where the Rangers almost maybe quit on the season, or it looked like they would, and then all of a sudden they got the trades and then they took off. A little before that, they took off themselves, and then they got the trades and carried on. Well, I've been waiting to talk to you about this with your Mets for so long, because it seemed as if the low point in the season for those Mets was when the Cubs completed the season sweep of the Mets in New York. And then after that point, they just took off. I mean, how shocked were you when the Mets started taking off, they got the trades, and now all of a sudden they are, for the first time since 2006, NL Eastern Division champions?
Amongst my immediate family, I guess, who are all Mets fans, I've split the season, when we talk about it, into two portions. I have Season A and Season B, and I'm not a fan of Season A. I had quit during Season A a few times, but Season B's been a lot of fun. But no, it's interesting that you point out that Cubs series, because I think a lot of people tend to point towards the deadline and some of the stuff that happened then, but the Mets had lost 4 in a row to the Cubs, like you mentioned, at home. The season series to the Cubs was then a loss at 7-0. The whole season appeared to be a loss. I actually remember reading a couple articles in the New York papers that are always a little bit more harsh on their teams than other papers. But a couple articles that said, they had driven the final stake in, basically, because the Mets were headed out on a 6-game road trip to L.A. and San Francisco. And it looked like Terry Collins wasn't even going to make it back from that road trip as the manager. They ended up going 4-2 on that road trip. They swept the D-backs going into the break to finish the final, I guess it would be 9 games of the first half at 9-2, or 7-2, I'm sorry. And that kind of saved their season even more than the deadline deals. But no, moving forward, the deadline deals were, I've never seen a team impacted as much by a group of deals. I mean, maybe you could point to the Blue Jays. This year would be the only other team that I can think of in the last 20 years that have been impacted as much as those two clubs have by deadline deals. And it's not just the Cespedes thing. I mean, Sandy Alderson did a great job of shoring up the bench, because I think the biggest point that a lot of Mets fans were making in Season A, if you will, was that the Mets weren't 1 bat away. They were about 4 or 5 bats away. There were a lot of times where they were playing 4 or 5 guys that were 4A players, if you will. They weren't quite big leaguers. They weren't quite AAA players. And so they added Kelly Johnson. They added Juan Uribe. They essentially added David Wright to the mix. And that was huge. I mean, I said back in the spring the Mets couldn't compete without Wright, and really they didn't compete until Wright came back. They were still fluttering around 500. They added d'Arnaud, who was injured most of the year. They added Conforto, who's kind of our version of Kyle Schwarber. And I've never seen such a contrast in seasons. I mean, it's almost like I rooted for an entirely different team down the last 2 months of the season. And interestingly enough, since we're talking about the postseason, they've become a World Series contender. I really do think so. I mean, obviously they've got the pitching. I mean, that's what gets you deep into October. And with
even though it's a young pitching staff,
it's young.
very young.
It's young. They've gotten a little bit worn out, I think, in September, but I will applaud the Mets for giving them some rest down the stretch. And the last 2 starts for DeGrom have looked fantastic. The last 2 starts for Syndergaard have been unbelievable. Harvey looked great again last night, although he was overshadowed a little bit by Max Scherzer.
Yeah,
but,
just a little.
Yeah, but and now they have a formidable lineup to go with it. And their bullpen is a little bit top heavy, but if they can get through 7, 8, and 9, I think that they'll be fine there too. So it's a legitimate World Series contender. It's unfathomable almost to me because I had given up on the season.
The
and
low
I think,
point that the Mets were in June.
Right, and June was a terrible month, and it looked like they couldn't score more than 1 run a game to save their lives. But we'll see. You know, I think that they've set themselves up well for the future, if nothing else. So we'll see what happens.
Mets taking on the Dodgers for the NLDS. They both have obviously clinched their spots for a little while now. The Dodgers own the home field advantage for that. Michael Dixon, this series, really an interesting series. It's 2 classic baseball teams going up against one another, starting out in Los Angeles, then going back to New York. And it's just so interesting because you have this great pitching staff that the Dodgers possess in Cy Young contenders, and Kershaw, who's a winner of it, and Greinke, who probably should have been to this point. And then you've got this Dodgers offense that is somehow, it does not look that dangerous, yet it somehow is, and they've pieced it together, and they're just that good. And their bullpen is good. And then on the Mets side, the young, inexperienced pitching that's amazing, the offense that's just powering its way through. Do you see the Mets having a chance to win this series against the Dodgers, considering that the Mets are going to go up against some great pitching, but so are the Dodgers?
I definitely see the Mets as having a chance. I don't think this is any sort of circumstance like we talked about the American League where it seems like you got a team like the Blue Jays that is not going to lose or that it's going to take a lot for them to lose. I think the Dodgers have flaws. I think, of course, the Mets have a few flaws as well. And so based on that fact, I think that this is going to be an interesting series, a series definitely worth watching and worth tuning in for. But at the end of the day, I do think, as much as I don't want to believe this to be true just because I love the story that the Mets have become, I do think the Dodgers are good enough to get back to that or to get to that NLCS. And I think that it's very similar to what we talked about with the Royals. There's the fact that there have been a lot of teams around them that have struggled with being very good and then being not very good in some stretches throughout the season. But the Dodgers, very much like the Cardinals, have just been solid. There haven't been a whole lot of real issues to worry about. I think if you're the Los Angeles Dodgers, I had some questions out there, of course, with Pete Puig and his injury issues this year, and Jock Peterson, who was phenomenal through the first couple months of the season, has experienced a pretty significant drop-off. But they've got all kinds of guys throughout that lineup that can contribute. Corey Seager, Kyle Seager's little brother, is turning out to be a phenomenal, a really, really exciting prospect as well.
Absolutely.
So I think the Dodgers, top to bottom, are a better team than the New York Mets. But at the same time, that series is a lot closer than I think a lot of people want to give it credit for. And do not be surprised at all to see the Mets get to that championship series.
And I think the reason with that is because of the experience that the Mets have. Juan Uribe has been there. Yoenis Cespedes has been there. Bartolo Colon has been there. And those guys are, at least Cespedes is such a dangerous weapon, Matt. It's just, the Mets lucked out in getting him, and it's kind of befuddling to me to see that no team, for some reason, wants to keep Yoenis Cespedes on their team, because he is a guy I think that you almost build around a little bit. And the Mets are just so fortunate to have him in addition to all the other weapons that they have.
Well, going forward, I think the Cespedes question is intriguing to me, especially as a Mets fan, because you have a fan base who is longing. I mean, you can almost go one step further from longing. I mean, desperate to have a bat like Cespedes with to couple with this pitching staff. And he comes, albeit in a rental form or seemingly rental form, and he almost forces the hand of management. I mean, management almost has to, almost owes it to the fan base at this point to re-sign him, yet he's going to command $200 million in 7 years. So I don't know if that's feasible. But aside from that, back to the playoff series, I want to make one point. The Dodgers do have just kind of coasted through most of the season. I do agree with that. And there's never been too much worry at any particular time. They've even been no-hit twice, and I don't think that there was much worry, many eyebrows raised. They've built enough depth at all their positions. Their bullpen was a little shaky in August, but they've kind of righted the ship there. The only thing that would intrigue me, if we're going on the record, I'm picking the Dodgers to win the series. I don't think the Mets will win when it's all said and done. But the only thing that would intrigue me is the fact that if the Mets split 1 and 2, so you're going to have Game 1 DeGrom versus Kershaw, you're going to have Game 2 Syndergaard versus Greinke. If the Mets split that, the Dodgers 3 and 4 starters are not as good as the Mets 3 and 4 starters. People forget that the Mets are still going to throw Harvey Game 3. I mean, Matt Harvey's got a 2.60 ERA this year. I mean, that's no slouch. The Dodgers have to go to Alex Wood and Brett Anderson and stuff. So if the Mets split 1 and 2 and then can either split 3 and 4 or win it at home in 3 and 4, let's say they split it, it goes to Game 5, anything could happen.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
I think the Mets are in a hole, obviously. If they lose the first 2 games, it would be an expected hole because it's so hard to beat Kershaw and Greinke. Either one of them, it'd be an expected hole. But if they split that, the series could end up rather interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Moving to the bottom portion of the NL side of the postseason picture. Wild card game, Cubs and Pirates in the playoffs for that wild card game. And either it's going to be at Wrigley, and it's going to be jumping at Wrigley. I know that for a fact. Or it's going to be in Pittsburgh. That place is going to be seeing another wild card game. If the Pirates host it, it'll be the 3rd year in a row that the Pirates have hosted the wild card game, and they have lost it both years. Or actually, they won it the first year. They lost it last year to the Giants, and now once again, a team that matters more importantly to me could be there. Or could be hosting the Pirates in the Cubs. And I don't know. I don't feel it's going to be Jake Arrieta against Garrett Cole. That much is certain. It doesn't matter where it's played. It's going to be Arrieta Cole. The question is for the Cubs, can they get to Garrett Cole? Because they have not been able to at all this season. He has owned the young Cubs hitting. The pitching opposite Garrett Cole normally hasn't been good. I don't know if Arrieta and Cole have matched up before. But the fact of the matter is that Jake Arrieta is on cruise control right now in how good he is pitching. So the question is, and Michael Dixon, I'll start with you. Can the Cubs break through against Garrett Cole? And if they do, will they win? I hope they will. I don't know if they will. It could be one of those games where it goes to extra innings, and if it's at Wrigley, then I'm really thinking the Cubs could win because the Cubs had, I think, 10-plus walk-offs this year. But if it's in Pittsburgh, I'm not too thrilled about the chances that the Cubs could win a scoreless ball game in extra innings against the Pirates with a chance to go to the NLDS for the first time since 2008 on the line.
I think that sorry about that. I think the second part of your question is easy to answer, and it's if they get to Garrett Cole, will they win? Yes, I think so because you've got Jake Arrieta on the mound. The question, if they get to Garrett Cole, is one that is much more difficult to answer, but if there is a lineup in baseball that isn't the Toronto Blue Jays or the Houston Astros that scares me as much as anyone, it's the Cubs lineup,
really? Top
to bottom, just because there is so much. Not just on what it has been this year, but what it has the potential to become. And you're going to give these guys, these kids that, at the beginning of the year, you had questions surrounding a guy like Chris Bryant. You're going to give all these kids an opportunity to play meaningful, really true, meaningful baseball on the biggest stage at the age of 22, 23, 24 years old. And to me, if I'm a young kid, that's just exciting. That's an intangible we talked about. That it's just fun to get out there, go out there and play. And to me, it's a shame that one of these teams is going to lose after one game. Mm-hmm. And I know people talk about how much the extra wild card spot kind of sucks because you got teams that are going to get screwed, like the Cubs or the Pirates, whoever ends up losing this game. But at the same time, you have to look at the fact that without this second wild card game, one of these teams would not be playing in the postseason. So it sucks, that one of these teams is going to go home, but at the same time, it should be a wildly entertaining game. And I do think the Cubs have what it takes to beat Pittsburgh. I personally think the Cubs are a little bit better than the Pirates. I would like to see the Pirates finally break through and make a bit of a run, just for as good as those fans have been and good as this team's been. But I think I do like the Cubs in this. I like Jake Arrieta on the mound. I don't know who wouldn't like Jake Arrieta on the mound.
Oh, yeah.
And, look for the Cubs to set up a wildly entertaining NLDS.
The three best teams in baseball,
all in the same division,
are in the NL Central.
May have been the best division in the history of the game.
I know. I can't believe I'm saying that. And I can't believe I'm saying the Cubs are included in that sentence of the three best teams in baseball are in the NL Central, and one of them is the Chicago Cubs. To me, that's just unfathomable because I've gotten used to the last 5-6 years since how 2008 ended with the Dodgers sweeping the Cubs and advancing to the NLCS, and then the Cubs having a shot at the All-Star break in 2009, and then they just fell off the table, and that was the last time they finished above 500. And then 2010 and 2011 and 2012 and 13 and 14, and now here we are in 2015. They start off great. I keep telling all my Cub friends, he's like, don't get excited yet. Just watch, stay calm. And now all of a sudden in September, they're competing. They've clinched a spot in the postseason. And it's like, wow, this is awesome. But I feel like I still can't get excited yet because it's not the ultimate ending to getting people to shut up and say, oh, well, when was the last time the Cubs won the World Series? Well, it's not
coming.
I hope
it's coming.
That's what I hope. And because that's what's happened is Theo Epstein and Jed Hoyer have built up what they said they would try to do. They've got their manager. They've got their players. The front office is there. Everything is there. And now it's like, wow, we're back in the postseason. It's a wild card game. It's not the true postseason to, you and to Michael and to me. But it's something. It's a start.
I think a Cubs fan should recognize that the Cubs have done a hell of a job with this rebuild. They really
absolutely
have. I mean, this is a model in how to rebuild a franchise. I mean, the Phillies should take notes. I mean, like the Cubs went out and they said, cope with us for a couple years, bear with us for a couple years. This is what's going to happen, and this is what has happened. And frankly, there's something to be said, and the Nationals displayed this for a few years. The Astros are displaying this. There's something to be said for not middling around with your rebuild and just being, we'll be 10th best or 11th best. The Cubs stripped that down. They got a top 3 pick for so many years in a row, top 5 pick for so many years in a row, and that has manifested itself, obviously, now. I agree with Michael's point, and it's an interesting one about you're giving guys who seemingly, this is a weird term to use because we're at this age, so it feels like we can use it. You're giving guys who they almost feel like they have nothing to lose because they weren't supposed to be there. They're just young kids, a lot of them.
Exactly.
And you're giving them a chance. And I frankly think because of that, the Cubs scare me more than any team. As a fan of another NL team in the playoffs, the Cubs scare me more than any team in the National League, and that's not because they beat the Mets 7 out of 7 times this year. It's because they are a scary franchise. I mean, they really are. Like, I just would not want to play the Cubs at all. And it's funny that a lot of people do talk about it's a shame that we can't see both of these teams, have a series to themselves. I don't know if I feel that way as much about the Pirates. I mean, we know what the Pirates are. You'd like to see them break through, but I don't think they're as dynamic from a pitching standpoint and from a lineup standpoint as the Cubs are. And so I think it would be a shame if we didn't get to see the Cubs in a series. And it would be a shame if we didn't get to especially see them play the Cardinals, which would be a fantastic theater.
It'd be unbelievable baseball.
But, you know, I don't think it's almost statistically impossible that the three best teams in a division, given the amount of times they play each other, would all come, or the three best teams in baseball would all come from the same division. Exactly. So this will never happen again, really. We won't have to deal with it. It is what it is this year. It sucks that it comes down to one game, but that's how it is. And it'd be more of a shame to me if the Cubs didn't move on. I do want to just touch on one more thing about that game specifically, though, and it's playing devil's ad for a second.
Yeah.
I've seen Mets starters over the last 3-4 years, obviously, go on fantastic runs. DeGrom was actually on one earlier this year. He had dipped his ERA below 2. He was in the Cy Young conversation when this was happening, and it stretched out for almost like a year at this point, this run he was on of like 25 straight starts where a cumulative ERA of like 1.7 or something. And I remember it all fell apart like that. I mean, with the snap of the fingers. And it fell apart in Philadelphia, of all places. He gave up 7 runs in 3 innings one night. And he struggled for like 3 or 4 starts after that. He's kind of back on track now. But this is a question to you, Ryan, as a Cubs fan. And I've asked a few, because there's a lot of them in this area. I've asked a few of them this question. Do you get worried at all? I know Jake Arrieta's on an unbelievable run right now. But do you get worried at all that, because it's unsustainable? I mean, we know that with a statistical, if you stretch it out enough, he can't sustain these numbers. Do you get worried at all that magic dries up all of a sudden on Tuesday, or are you that confident, or on Wednesday? Excuse me. Are you that confident that he's just going to continue being as good as he was?
I think so, because to me, I feel like when I look at Jake Arrieta, I see Madison Bumgarner.
Right.
I see not just the beard and all of that. I see the mentality that Jake Arrieta has and the focus, and literally it's like watching a right-handed version of Madison Bumgarner who goes over the top. Bumgarner has this focus. He's got this poker face. He doesn't let his emotions show unless, some young kid is going to show him up with a bat flip. But Bumgarner just goes out there. He pitches his butt off, and he does his job as hard as he can. And that's what Jake Arrieta has done for the majority of this season. Jake Arrieta had a 4-6 record at one point. He hasn't lost a game since that point in the season, which is just unreal to think about. But I can't think of him not going any longer than he has, because he has gone so long without losing a game, because he just goes out there and he puts on that poker face and he just pitches like it's going to be his last game. He leaves everything out on the field. He mixes his pitches well. He mixes his locations well. He doesn't try and overdo things. Just like Madison Bumgarner, he just goes and does his job and wins.
Well, and I guess here's probably the difference between Jake Arrieta and, say, like a DeGrom or a Harvey. DeGrom and Harvey, they're gas throwers. It's generation MPH. And sometimes your fastball can be 98, but if it's straight, it's still going to get hit. I mean, these are major league hitters.
Exactly.
The thing about Arrieta is his stuff is almost it's immune. It's immune to giving up any more than 3 runs. It seems like, because his slider. You might get on base. You might get a hit against his slider, but you're not going to mount a rally against the type of repertoire that he has with pitches.
And he hasn't hung a pitch in so long, too. In addition to that loss thing, I think the fact of him not hanging a pitch so badly, that streak has gone on for so long. I don't know if he's really even done it at all this year.
And for that reason, I guess I wouldn't be totally afraid either if I was a Cubs fan. But I think the reason the question spawned in my mind is because we talked about it in the AL preview. I mean, we are fans of teams that find ways to lose, and you fear that almost.
2008 Cubs, Ryan Dempster had 18 wins. Ted Lilly had 18 wins. They both lost. I don't even know if Ted Lilly pitched. No, he did. The Cubs lost in 2008 because they sent two great pitchers that had 18 wins apiece, Ted Lilly, Ryan Dempster, and they both lost in the postseason.
Right.
And it was like that magic that they had in the regular season was gone. And you mentioned it earlier, Michael Dixon, that it doesn't matter what you did in the regular season. It's, do you have momentum going into a game right now at this juncture that can carry you on to the next one and to the next one? Are you hot? Are your guys click? Is the chemistry clicking? Are your guys producing in the way that you expect? And it's just so hard for me to think right now and to believe that the Cubs have that going into this game against the Pirates.
Well, the one thing I do worry about, and I will contradict myself a little bit by alluding to the preseason or the regular season and what happened in the regular season. But I do think that tendencies that teams have, of course, throughout the regular season will show up again in the postseason. And the Cubs, to me, were very much, now granted, I have lost a little bit of touch over these last couple months because the Mariners have been so dang bad. But to me, on the outside, the Cubs have been one of those teams where when they're winning, they're winning. And when they're losing, they're not.
Exactly.
They're losing. And if they're the first team, if they're Team A, like you said, there's almost like there's two teams that you're rooting for when it comes to the Mets. If you're rooting for Team A when it comes to the Cubs, the one's currently on a 7-game winning streak and pulled off runs like that constantly throughout the regular season, then the Cubs are good enough to win the World Series. If you're seeing Team B, which is the one that just wasn't quite there and very characteristic of a young team, then it's going to be very difficult. And if that... the same thing can happen Tuesday. Tuesday's the NL wild card game, right? Wednesday's the NL wild card game. That kind of stuff. It starts Wednesday, and we'll see exactly what we'll see. Team A or Team B come Wednesday. If it's Team A or Team, I don't even remember which one I assigned. But if it's a team that loses a lot,
good one. Team B is the
okay.
bad
So
one.
Team A, if it's Team A, then they should beat the Pirates. They, quite frankly, have just as much capability as anyone to beat the Cardinals. If it's Team B, could be a very, very short playoff stint.
And see, that's what I'm preparing for. I'm preparing for Team B, whether the game is at Wrigley or in Pittsburgh. I'm preparing for the Cubs to not do well against Garrett Cole, and it ends up being a 1-0 decision in which the Cubs offense couldn't get going, and some crazy ground ball single up the middle with a guy who got on third base because of a squibber that was, down the third base line that didn't even go 60 feet. He gets on, he steals, a ground ball to the right side, advances him to third, and then a base hit up the middle. Boom, it's 1-0, and that's your ball game. That's what I'm expecting.
There's nothing quite as catastrophic to a team's postseason hopes or chances as an ace. And I mean, both teams are going to run into an ace on Wednesday. And
exactly.
One of them's going to fall to the hands of an ace.
Yeah.
And that's just how it is.
And there's no real, at this point, there's no real shame in losing that wild card game just based on the way everything has gone in this season in terms of the NL Central. But again, it's a shame that one of those teams is going to have to lose. I agree the Cubs are a better story than the Pirates, and I think everyone in America would agree as well. But yeah, this what October is literally all about.
I feel like this is a counseling. I feel like this is a counseling session for me right now, and kind of the same thing for you too. Because both of our teams are in the postseason for the first time in far too long for us. And poor Michael Dixon's Mariners were expected to win the World Series
and now
this
they
year.
have the longest playoff drought in baseball.
Exactly.
But I'll tell you something, Ryan. And the first thing I said in the AL podcast was this, the AL preview. A division title in baseball means so much more. A postseason berth means so much more in baseball than it does in any other sport because it's the culmination of such a long year. And for us, it's a culmination of such a long period of time, right? I sat down in kind of a moment of reflection when the Mets clinched last Saturday, and I thought to myself, man, it's not just 9 years that I've watched the Mets for. It's over 1,000 meaningless games that I've sat and watched that have totally no meaning.
Exactly.
So the culmination of that on Saturday with them winning the division was, and I hate to say this because I hate taking the loser sentiment into this, but I will say it here because it's the truth. It was enough to carry me for a successful baseball season as a fan.
That's
because
the same here for the Cubs.
So much. It's such a long time. It's such a large sample size of losing.
Yeah.
And I'll take the 1 year of winning.
Especially for the Mets to overcome the odds that were the Washington Nationals in that division. I mean, everybody in the world thought the Nationals were going to run away with that National
And they
League.
had at one point.
And and you have the Nationals, and then you've also got the Mets, who were good, but I don't think a lot of people thought they were good enough to do what they've done. And then in that NL East, you've got 3 teams that just you had the Marlins were supposed to be better than they were this year, but they were a disaster. And then of course you've got the Phillies, who are just in the middle of a complete overhaul, and the Braves, who are approaching that as well. So the National League East had an interesting dynamic the entire year, but no matter what, it seemed like the Nationals were going to be the team in that division, and the Mets have, pardon the cliche, but essentially shocked the world.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun.
And the weird thing is if the Mets lose today, there will only be one team in the postseason that, from the NL side, that doesn't have 90 or more wins,
stuck on
and
89,
that will be the
It
Mets.
seemed like a foregone conclusion a week ago that they were going to win 94, but man, the Mets have struggled. I'm actually looking at that game right now. It's interesting because the Mets got no hit last night. They have a no hitter through 6 today.
Do they?
Yeah,
That's right.
They're no hitting. It's a combined no hitter of the Nationals through 6. But the Mets haven't scored a run again.
It's still scoreless.
So
That's
it's
great.
almost, I'm afraid that season A is creeping back into my life this week. They've scored one
At
run.
the worst possible
they've
time.
scored one run all week, and I've been watching with one eye closed, trying to convince myself it doesn't matter. But even that, I'll take that. I'll take it because they won the division, and that was a fantastic experience.
So then the winner of Cubs Pirates takes on the Cardinals, and so it sounds like it's going to be more of an interesting series if the Cubs are taking on the Cardinals than if the Pirates are taking on the Cardinals. Does that mean you guys have the assumption that the Cardinals would just blow right by the Pirates if the Pirates get in?
Actually not. I think that I don't know that the Cardinals win the DS
I
series.
don't either. I
Really?
don't. I
Either
think
against
that-
either team.
I just don't believe that the Cardinals it goes back to what happened last year. There's just something about the Cardinals being so good in the regular season. It's like they're so good in the regular season that when it comes to the postseason, they tend to, I want to say, let you down because I don't really care about the Cardinals,
Right.
but they always seem to.
They get to the NLCS and they can't break through.
Do it, and I cannot put a finger on what exactly it is.
Well, the
But
San
the
Francisco
fact that
Giants, two of those 3 years.
But it's something within the Cardinals that it's just like, I don't know. I this year, they may be the only 100-game winner in baseball, but are they that good? Are they as good as their record would indicate? And I'm not sure they are. And right behind them are the Cubs and the Pirates. Literally right behind them. It's not like we're talking about a 100-game winner who wins the division and a couple of 85-win teams battling in that wild card. You've got two teams that are going to have just 96, 97 wins right around there, playing a team that won 100 games. And I think the Pirates and the Cubs, no matter who wins that series, are just as good, if not better, than the Cardinals. The Cardinals have dealt with injuries all year, and they've had a successful year based on that as well. But and part of that, I think part of that is also me wanting something other than the Cardinals to emerge out of the National League, or at least emerge out of the National League Divisional Series. But yeah, I agree 100%. I just don't know if I see the Cardinals winning.
Well, we talked about regression a little bit in the AL podcast, and teams that are not as good as their record may say. I think we've waited all year for the Cardinals have just surprised us, I think, at every turn. There's been a lot of NL Manager of the Year talk for Joe Madden, Terry Collins, but I think Matheny deserves a lot of talk there.
Because it's very difficult to disagree with that.
Right, because they've prevented runs at a historic clip, but with who? With John Lackey, with Jaime Garcia. They lost Wainwright. They weren't supposed to prevent runs at that kind of clip. They weren't supposed to still outscore their opponents as much as they have.
We didn't even know what they would do at the beginning of the season because they didn't have much there. They didn't re-sign Carlos Beltran. They didn't keep some of their guys that they had the season before. They just kept what was there and then added a couple of new players and was like, well, how are these guys going to do, the same thing that they did last year? And they just went and did it.
And they were decimated by injury, too.
Yeah.
I touched on that a little bit. Matt Adams missed almost the entire season. Matt Holliday missed a lot of the season.
Chris Carpenter retired.
Yeah, and Wainwright's hurt. I'm trying to think. They had another injury. I know Piscotty got hurt just last week. John Jay's been hurt a lot of the year.
The big one is Yachty.
Yachty's hurt now, too.
Year.
And the reason that I'm skeptical about the Cardinals, although I've been dousing them with praise for a few minutes now, is because I just wonder if this is now the time when all of that catches up to them against teams in the Cubs and Pirates who are, like Michael said, they're not that much worse.
They're fundamentally sound, a little bit more fundamentally sound than the Cardinals.
Right, and with no Yachty, and now Carlos Martinez going down, and I just don't know how the pitching staff will respond, and I'm just not sure that the Cardinals hold on to I don't want to call it a magical run because it's just ho-hum for them, but I don't know how they hold on to the 100-win clip and how that translates into the playoffs against teams, whether it be the Pirates or Cubs, a team that's not that much worse than them. But, we talked earlier about the intangibles in the playoffs. Maybe the Cardinals just ride the Cardinal way all the way to the World Series. I told you I wouldn't be surprised if it was Cardinals-Royals just because they are the most experienced teams in their respective leagues. But I'm worried. I'm worried about the Cardinals. I'm worried about Waka. He's been terrible in September.
Lance Lynn hasn't been the Lance Lynn
terrible
we know,
as well down the stretch.
You wonder about the Cardinals. And it's a situation where they just ran out, very similar to the Royals, where they've been good from the start, right? But things start to catch up with them. I know at one point it seemed like they were something like 81-45 or something like that.
Number,
I mean, they were on pace to win 105, 106, 107 games, and they have slowed down considerably over these last couple months. And you wonder that kind of thing, that if it catches up to them in October. And again, I feel like part of it is me hoping that there's a different story than the St. Louis Cardinals this year. But you can't. No matter what happens, you cannot blame or you can't take away what that organization does year in and year out, because this year was not a year they were supposed to win 100 games at all. In fact, this was a year where a lot of people said early in the year, is this final, or at least before the year, is this finally the year when the Cardinals come back to earth? And that organization is very similar to other organizations across the league, and it hasn't been, because they are phenomenal at what they do.
Yeah. So, with that said, which team of these unbelievably solid teams that we've gone through for the NL, which one gets to the World Series, gentlemen? Matt Rigby, I'll start with you.
I haven't thought about that question as much in the NL. I think we talked about how it's almost like a slam dunk, it seems like, with the Blue Jays, because they don't have flaws. The NL is so darn competitive and has been all year that it's obviously much more of a crapshoot. I'd love to see who wins the wild card game before I made that prediction.
Yeah.
That being said, and I'm hesitant to say this because of what I hit on when we were previewing the Dodgers-Mets series, about the Dodgers after Greinke and Kershaw being thin in the starting rotation. But if you get to a 7-game series with the Dodgers, Greinke and Kershaw are each starting twice. That's 4 out of 7. If you can, that means a team would have to split those basically, whoever they're playing.
Right.
If they didn't, and it's down 3-1, you have to get one more win from somebody else on your rotation. I don't think that'll happen. I've been waiting all year to kind of cast aside the thought that the Dodgers were finally going to get it done this year, but to have two pitchers that dominant on the same team in October is almost just unbeatable, I think, to me. If playoff Kershaw, who is, I kind of use that name jokingly, if he doesn't show up, and if Greinke's as good as he has been, I think the Dodgers go to the World Series finally, at long last for Mattingly, because they've had the roster for a while now.
Oh yeah.
And so I'd go with the Dodgers.
Yeah. Michael Dixon.
I believe the same thing, but and for essentially the same reasons. So to not copy what he said, I'll go ahead and I don't want to say play devil's advocate, but try to do something a little different. I like to think, I'll go out on a limb and say that the winner of that NL wildcard game will get through and make it to the World Series. And I personally
got me a little excited there.
I personally
Michael.
want it to be the Chicago Cubs. I think the Cubs are very good from top to bottom. The Pirates are good from top to bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that team is going to win that divisional series. When it comes to the Yankees, or when it comes to the Mets and the Dodgers, and I do not want to insult your New York Mets by saying this, but there is the feeling inside of me that is saying it's the Mets. At the end of the day, they're still a couple years away.
I agree.
And that prevents me from really believing that they can truly get to the World Series. Because when you put it in your mind, you say the Mets World Series, it being a realistic possibility like it is, things don't connect.
Right.
My mind is not necessarily connecting there. So I think that, I would love to see that whoever gets out of that wild card game, I would love to see those teams, either one of those teams, make a run of the postseason, because they're both good stories. Cubs more so, a little bit better, a little more than the Pirates, just because the Pirates have been there for a couple of years now. But I do think that they're good enough to do so, and it would be really, really exciting for that to happen.
Yeah.
Like I said, I would almost wish to make the prediction after the game, because I don't know that the Pirates could make it. I do think that if Cubs won the wild card game, they might become my pick, just because I would not want to play the Cubs. And we talked throughout both of these podcasts, we've talked about intangibles. Is there a greater intangible in the National League than Joe Madden? I don't know.
Exactly.
I don't think so,
Yeah.
You look
know?
at, I mean, I as a Mariners fan, goodness gracious, as much as I appreciated what Lloyd McClendon has done in stepping in at such a difficult time with the organization, with all that came out about Jack C and how terrible he was, I was almost hoping that the Mariners would have waited a year to hire a manager so they could have gone after Joe Madden and thrown $1 zillion at him, because that is the intangible. Really, it's tough to quantify, but it's just, if a Joe Madden is managing a franchise, they're going to be good. They're going to be darn good. And look what he did with the Tampa Bay Rays. I know the Rays are for their payroll and the facilities that they have to use and everything, they're not a very sexy franchise by any means, but they were darn good for a while.
They're in the Joe Madden
and that
years,
was because of Joe Madden.
Absolutely. Moving away now, since we have a little bit of time here, from the postseason picture to the key and always fun to discuss MVP and Cy Young races. And at this point, gentlemen, I think it would be easier to possibly discuss the AL and NL Cy Young, or I'm sorry, AL and NL MVP races than the Cy Young. So let's start with the MVP races, and we'll start in the American League. As far as batting averages go, I know that's kind of a big deal for some. Miguel Cabrera with the highest batting average, but he has 119 games. Xander Bogaerts, second highest of the most games played. Second highest overall, 155, 320. And then, once again, ironically, for the second year in a row, Jose Altuve is right there at the top, in the top three in batting average, 153 for the amount of games that he played. But at the end of the day, is there a clear-cut choice as far as MVP goes for the American League?
I guess I'm siding with the crowd here, but I think it's Josh Donaldson. I don't think there's any question, because when he came over to Toronto, I think that was the finishing touch to their lineup. He stretched it out so much. And also because I don't think he received enough resistance to the award in the American League, to be honest. Similar to what I'm going to say in the National League. I think it's just, I don't want to call it a runaway, but as much in the AL, I don't think it's as much of a runaway, but I just don't think that there were as many fantastic seasons put together by guys in the American League. And so I'd have to go with Donaldson, especially because after the break, it seemed to me like, not after the break, after the deadline, I'm sorry. After the deadline, it seemed to me like every time you looked up, Donaldson was hitting a home run in a big spot.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. And there was an interesting article on Grantland this week. I think Ben Lindbergh wrote it, about the clutch factor, if you want to use that at all, and if you want to invoke the word value into the award, and you want to talk about the clutch factor. And he was more gearing it towards the National League and talking about Anthony Rizzo's clutch factor and stuff. But if you are going to invoke that, I think you invoke it even more in the American League and see what Donaldson has done from a clutch standpoint and just big hits at big times, and that makes the answer Donaldson for me.
I agree 100%. I think the only person that you could give the award to over Donaldson would be, of course, Mike Trout. And I think that when you take into the team's success, you've got the Blue Jays, who are the NL or the American League East champions, and then you've got the Angels, who are fighting to get in at this point. I think when you put those side by side, because both have fantastic numbers, both have the exact same wins above replacement, I think that you give it to Donaldson just based on what he's meant to the Blue Jays versus what Trout's meant to the Angels.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess that a lot of that WAR too is driven by defensive metrics.
And Donaldson has been a phenomenal defensive third baseman this year.
Moving over to the NL side of things, this one, I just saw Nolan Arenado's name pop up. He leads the National League he's tied with Bryce Harper for the National League in home runs. It's very difficult for me, at least, to say that Bryce Harper is the guy because of how great of a season he has had. 331 average, 42 home runs, 99 RBIs. That's amazing. But Nolan Arenado is not even close to anybody in the RBI count. 130 RBIs. The next highest is 108 by Paul Goldschmidt, and Arenado also has 42 home runs. It's just unbelievable to see those numbers from him, plus how amazing he has been at the third base position. Just you can't even describe it. He gobbles up every single thing at third base that goes his way. I would be leaning towards Harper, though, because the Nationals did better than the Rockies, but it's very difficult for me.
Well, Harper's had an unbelievable season.
Absolutely.
And we were all waiting. I mean, it's easy to forget. What is Bryce Harper, like 20? He's like 23, 22.
Yeah.
He is literally 2 years older. He's as old as you,
He's my age,
He's 2 years older than I am. He's a year older. This kid, and it seems like he's been in the league for a long time now, because he came up a couple years ago. And this was the season that I think we were all waiting for in terms of what Bryce Harper could be. You heard Bryce Harper as the name in the National League, sort of the future in the National League. You have Mike Trout as a future in the American League. And finally, Harper put it all together. Yes. Now, does that mean that this is going to be what Bryce Harper does every year from here on out? I don't know, because I also think Bryce Harper is a bit of a head case, and that is one of those intangibles that we talked about. But this year, just based on how unbelievable his season has been, with an OPS, 1,100, somewhere around there.
1.111.
Wins above replacement, sitting at like 9.5, which is too higher than any National League player. I believe Votto is next in the NL with 7.5, somewhere around there. You put those all in together, and I think this is the easiest decision that any voter has. Bryce Harper should get the NL MVP award.
Bryce Harper, only one of two people who has an OPS above 1,000. The other one is Joey Votto, who has 1.001. Just barely
eclipsed it. Yeah, Votto's had a crazy on base streak to end the season.
Yeah.
But I'd go with Harper too, because in a runaway, because he's put together somewhat quietly in this regard. I mean, the season hasn't been quiet, but I don't think a lot of people have talked about how, from a historical standpoint, how great this season has been. I mean, this might be the best season since Barry Bonds' home run record-breaking season. And it's interesting because I think one of the reasons he hasn't gotten a lot of publicity in that greatness of the season is because of the dumpster fire that has been the Nationals this year.
Yeah.
But also because his team hasn't been that good. I mean, aside from the media headlines that is the Nationals, the team's record hasn't been that good. And that exposes something interesting about the NL as a whole. And you brought up Arenado, Ryan. You look at the candidates for NL MVP, a lot of them are on losing teams, and it makes it hard for us to justify those decisions. Because, I mean, if you throw park factors out with Arenado, throw out the fact that he plays in Coors Field, he's got, and you just look at the numbers are gaudy, and he's probably the best defensive third baseman in the game. But the Rockies are so bad that I don't even know if he's in a lot of our top fives, whereas Rizzo is, and McCutchen is, and even a Cespedes has kind of creeped into a lot of people's top fives in the NL MVP, despite the lack of number of games played, just because those teams are better. Mm-hmm. And I think we value that as decision makers, whether it's right or wrong, or whether you interpret the award one way or another. As human decision makers, we value the fact that teams that win, number one, get more exposure nationally, but number two, also get more exposure in our minds.
Yep.
And so I still give it to Harper, but I think that being on bad teams affects people like Joey Votto and Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado.
Yeah, fair enough. AL Cy Young, last two things to discuss here. AL Cy Young, NL Cy Young. We'll start with the AL. And honestly, gentlemen, I think it comes down to two guys, David Price or Dallas Keuchel. If you want to go ERA route, it's David Price by 0.03 points. Dallas Keuchel, 20 wins. David Price has 18. The innings off by about 12, favoring Dallas Keuchel. The strikeouts favoring David Price. The whip is favoring Dallas Keuchel. But the walks is favoring David Price. The runs favoring David Price. Earned runs, that is. I don't know. I would, by default, I guess, go to Dallas Keuchel because of the wins, because that's what a lot of people look at.
I think
I don't know.
I think that both Cy Young races are extremely close. Mm-hmm. I think the NL one is closer, or not closer, but is close from better.
A dominance perspective.
Right, a more dominant, yes, that's a good way to put it. The AL, the two pitchers who are clearly, I think you put it well, are clearly vying for the award. They haven't had as great a year, so they're helped out by a down year, if you will, by starters in the American League, but it's still close. Here's why I give it to Price. Dallas Keuchel had a start. It was. I don't remember if it was on a Fox game on a Saturday or if it was on a TBS game on a Sunday. It was in September. It was against the Rangers. It was a big start for the Astros. It was a start that they had to have to kind of fend off Texas, and I think it was in the time when Texas took four straight.
It was that 4-game sweep, and Keuchel got rocked.
He gave up 7 runs. Yep. And it was on a weekend, and I think that's going to stick in voters' minds because it's what sticks in my mind. I saw Keuchel mow people down in the middle of the summer, but down the stretch, he just has not been as valuable as Price has been to the Blue Jays. Yeah. And Price has done it across divisions. He's transitioned seamlessly to the Blue Jays, which I think it deserves some attention that he's done that. It's not talked about enough because it's not that easy to do. And so I'd give it to Price because of the stretch run and because of just that one start that sticks in my mind from Keuchel that was just a total disaster.
Yeah.
And it's close, but I don't think it's as close or as dominant as the NL race.
Right.
You nailed it. And there's another stat that everyone throws out that in some ways I believe hurts Dallas Keuchel, and that's that ridiculous run he's had at home. I think he's 15-0 with a 1.45 ERA, somewhere around that at home.
He's got like Jose Fernandez numbers, but just in the AL.
It's literally unreal what he's been able to do at home. But with as much as he succeeded at Minute Maid Park, that also leaves up that notion that he hasn't been as good away from home, and therein brings the consistency issues. Not that Keuchel has struggled with consistency issues, but if you have to nitpick these kind of things when it comes to deciding who wins a prestigious award like this, and I think that goes against Keuchel in a way. And you nailed it on the head. I mean, Price has been so darn good for the Blue Jays and has been such an integral part. As good as that offense has been, they struggled significantly with pitching, and they needed to address that, and they did what they needed to do, and Price has been phenomenal.
Now to the NL side, and of course, by default, being a Cubs fan, I'm going to go with Jake Arrieta because I think his numbers and his dominance that he has had are better than Zach Greinke, but when you've got a guy in Zach Greinke who's got 3 losses and a 1.66 ERA and 32 starts, that, I mean, yeah, I'll admit that's very, very difficult to try and outdo. Arrieta has way more strikeouts than Greinke does. He's given up fewer home runs, but Arrieta's walked 8 more than Greinke. Runs obviously more in favor of Greinke than Arrieta. Yet the innings pitched goes to Arrieta. More starts than Greinke. One more start than Greinke. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And then even Garrett Cole is kind of trying to fight his way into that conversation. 19-8, 2.60, and 38 starts. But honestly, it's between Zach Greinke and Jake Arrieta without question. And I like I said, I'm going to fault. I'm giving it to Arrieta just because of the run that Jake Arrieta has gone through, in which he has not lost a start in I don't know how long. It's I think he's 15 and 1 or 15 and 0, some ridiculous number where he has not lost since June or May. I don't know, but Zach Greinke's very difficult to beat too. Again, in 32 starts with a 1.66 ERA and 3 losses and 19 wins.
I like Jake Arrieta from the standpoint you talked about. He's just sort of led that Cubs resurgence, and Greinke's been there for a while. The Dodgers have been there for a while, but Arrieta was good last year and came on this year and has been absolutely wonderful. And the Cubs have been that way as well. And I think if you look at because the Dodgers, I mean, they also have Clayton Kershaw. You think about that too, and what Jake Arrieta has meant to just how good the Cubs have been. I think if I'm a voter, that plays into my mind, and to me, it's Arrieta.
Yeah, Matt Rigby.
It might sound like a contradiction. It's not, because I pointed to the stretch run factor in the AL. I'm going to point to the stretch run factor here in the opposite aspect. I think Arrieta's been getting, for obvious reasons, all the Cy Young talk and attention because of his stretch run. And it's not to take anything away from his stretch run. I'm just not going to give him the award because of that, because I don't think the other two candidates have faltered down the stretch. They really haven't at all. Kershaw and Greinke have been fine. So for that reason, I'm going to gear... I'm Sabre slanted as a baseball fan. I try not to inject it as much into everyday conversation because, some people aren't, and that's fair. But I would give the award actually to Kershaw if I voted today. Yeah, because of the Sabre slant. And I value so much the strikeout from a pitcher. I really do, from a starting pitcher. I think that it's the most important stat that a pitcher could have. I think if you couple that with the walk ratio, it becomes even more important. And Kershaw has struck out batters at an historic clip again this year. I mean, it's funny because
300.
Right, it's funny because the ERA race is somewhat close. The wins race, whether people buy into that or not, is not as close. The strikeout race is a blowout.
Yeah,
like Kershaw has blown everybody out, and it's not even particularly close. And aside from that, you can inject WAR into it. I don't like that one as much. I look at his ability to keep the ball in the ballpark. I look at his dominance as far as like complete games and stuff. I know Greinke's ERA is low, but I think Greinke's got a little more luck from the defense behind him. I inject the strikeout stat into this argument, and I've gone back and forth on this a lot over the last couple months because I've wanted to give it to Arrieta because of the stretch run. I really have. But if I had to vote tomorrow, I'd probably go Kershaw 1. I'd go Arrieta 2, and I'd go Greinke 3. But man, you can't go wrong. The funny thing about this is we talked about so many position players in the MVP debates. If I actually voted for the NL MVP tomorrow, I'd probably vote Harper 1, Kershaw 2, Arrieta 3, Greinke 4. I'd probably put those 3 pitchers in the top 4 of the MVP debate, let alone the Cy Young debate.
And you touched on it too. You think about the Dodgers. Because you picked the Dodgers to go to the World Series. They got 2 of those guys, the 1-2 in their rotation.
Amazing.
I've never seen anything like that.
So, I mean, it's not to take away from the seasons that any of those 3 have had. I mean, for example, like I said, DeGrom was in the discussion for a while up until about mid-August, and he was riding like a 2.02 ERA at the time. He had the lowest whip of any of the 3 or of any of the 4. And I was like, man, he's still like, he's got such a competition. Like, this is not the year to be a good starting pitcher if you're DeGrom. And I went back to just 3 years ago when R.A. Dickey won the Cy Young as a Met, I looked at the numbers. Dickey had a 2.72 ERA that year when he won the Cy Young, which was the lowest of any National League qualified starter.
And that's in the NL.
Yeah, 2.72 in the NL this year is what, 10th? 10th lowest? I mean, that's the year Harvey's had, and no one's talking about him in the Cy Young debate. So
it's about Harvey's got 2.71, and that's 6th place currently.
6th place. So Dickey would have been about 6th place, then he would have got some votes if he had that. If you took Dickey's 2012 and put it this year in the NL, he'd get some votes. That's about it.
Yeah.
So it just speaks to, it's the wrong year to be a good starting pitcher in the NL. 2 of these guys have to lose. That's a shame, but
you can't go wrong.
You'll never take anything away from any of the 3 of them. I mean, Arrieta had the no-hitter, too. They can't take that away from him. And they're all 3 pitching in the postseason. So, it's
for a very good team.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that they realize they're aware of how good they've been. And the national media, especially in Arrieta's case, is finally aware of how good they are, too. So.
Well, gentlemen, this has been just absolutely fun. I am so thrilled that we were able to do this and sit down and discuss this. And we're definitely going to have to do a postseason wrap, a baseball wrap later on once there is a World Series champion crowned. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'd love to project forward some of these teams that we didn't even get to talk about either. Some teams that are exciting, like the Diamondbacks are an exciting team going into next year. And stuff.
Absolutely.
I'd love to talk about some of those teams too when it's all said and done.
Real brief note here on the final day of the year. Ichiro is pitching as we speak.
Oh, my goodness. Old Ichiro Suzuki pitching. That is amazing.
Baseball is a fun, dumb, weird game.
Oh, yeah.
It's fantastic.
It's the best.
Gotta love it.
I got some scores, too, if we're curious. I know it'll be less pertinent to someone listening to this.
Well, yeah. When this podcast is released,
for us 3,
it'll be much different.
For us 3, the Rangers are up 4-2 on the Angels, and they have the bases loaded with nobody out. In the bottom of the 7th,
might be what we predicted. Texas and the Blue Jays.
It made the most sense. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, this is going to be good. Well, gentlemen, this was great. Michael Dixon is a writer for the student newspaper at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. It's called the Daily Nebraskan. He does a lot of sports writing for them. Matt Rigby does a lot of KRNU announcing, play-by-play and color work for the student radio station. Be sure to check both of them out and listen to both of them as they both make appearances on KRNU. Great stuff from both of them. I'm Ryan Swanigan. Thanks for listening to both of these baseball podcasts, AL Edition and NL Edition, and we will talk to you once again. Be sure to check out the regular show on The Route, Facebook.com/TheRoute2, @the_Route2 on Twitter, and our website as is follows, theroute2.wordpress.com. See you next week. 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 See you next week.